On this video, I'm doing a reaction to this article from The Atlantic titled, Bring Back Communal Kid Discipline by Stephanie H. Murray. Let's go. On a trip to Prague a couple of years ago, my family piled into a rapidly filling metro car, and I wound up sitting next to my 6-year-old daughter while her 4-year-old sister sat directly across from us, on her own. At one point, my youngest pulled a knee up to her chest and rested her foot on the seat. Almost immediately, a woman sitting next to her who looked to be about 70 reached out and gently touched my daughter's foot, signaling her to put it down. My daughter was surprised, maybe a little embarrassed, but she understood and quickly obeyed. That's a good kid. For a split second, I wondered if I ought to feel chastised. Perhaps the woman was judging me for having failed at some basic parental duty. But something about the matter-of-fact, almost automatic way the woman had intervened reassured me that she wasn't thinking much about me at all. She was just going through the motions of an ordinary day on the train, in which reminding a child not to put her foot on the seat was perfectly natural gesture. I mean, if you think about it, the gesture was she was just like, hey, like, she's kind of like put her foot and acknowledged it. She didn't say anything. She didn't chastise her. She didn't like criticize her. She just let her know, like, hey, let's put our foot down. That's a completely appropriate way. It's also awesome, good discipline when we don't have to necessarily say anything. We just kind of do a motion and then they understand, or like a look and they understand. That means like the child understands what is expected of them, and they can read facial cues and they can read what motions mean to them. Ultimately, I was grateful for the woman's tap on my daughter's foot, but the exchange also felt foreign. In my experience, that sort of instruction from a random adult to a stranger's child isn't much of a thing in America, or for what it's worth in the United Kingdom where I currently live. Many people don't seem to think they have the authority to instruct, let alone touch, a kid who isn't theirs. They tend to leave it to the parent to manage a child's behavior, or they might silently fume when the parent doesn't step up. Yeah, like if someone's random stranger touches a kid, like, oh boy, like that's going to be, like I would even be a little bit like if someone like touched my child. I mean, if they did like the gentle, like tap your foot, like I completely understand that. But we are in America, we are very autonomous. Like we get to parent our children how we want to parent, and there's no real like communal discipline whatsoever. Plus, like there's so many different ways that American parents parent their kids. I mean, some of them don't lead to very good developmental outcomes, gentle parenting, but it's whatever. To informally test that assumption, I created a short online survey and ended up interacting with a dozen people from around the United States. Some were parents, some were not. Every single one said that outside certain situations where they were familiar with a kid's parent or where a child's safety was in question, they would hesitate before telling someone else's kid what to do for fear of upsetting the parent. Marty Sullivan, a technology consultant based in Tennessee, gave a representative answer. Generally, I prefer to avoid risking escalation, because I think that's the big thing. Like, we don't want to intervene, like we don't want to reprimand someone else's kid because we don't know what's going to happen, because we've lost this like tribe mentality amongst Americans. We're not Americans. We're this label and this label and this label and this label. And there's no sense of tribe or community or one way of doing things. We just don't have it in America currently, especially right now. These responses struck me as a bit of a shame, but because the exchange between my daughter and the woman in Prague seemed to reflect something altogether good, and I know I can't be alone in that thought. Both historical precedent and cultural norms in other parts of the world reinforce the idea that a stranger's meddling in the disciplining of a child can have significant merits. Well, if you think about it, like we have Hillary Clinton's quote, right? It takes a village to raise a child. We don't have that anymore. Like a lot of us don't have that anymore. I know, like I have it with like my close neighbors. Like they know that they can not discipline sounds harsh, but like they know that they can correct my children's behaviors, and that is okay. And they'll like send me text messages and be like, "Hey, we did this," and I'll be like, "Yeah, that's okay. I don't care." Or like I remember like growing up, And in that 9 block, neighborhood that we had on the south side of Chicago, like my dad would always tell me, like, if you do anything wrong, like I'm going to know about it. And how he knew about it was there was other people, there was like the neighbors looking out the windows, right? And they were going to tell my dad if I ever stepped out of line. And then my dad would discipline me himself. The highly individualistic approach to managing kids' behavior in public is particularly American and a historical anomaly. There we go. David Lancy, an anthropologist and professor emeritus at Utah State University, wrote to me that for the majority of human existence, it was unquestionable that the whole village participates in child rearing. Siblings, peers, aunts, grandmas, he told me, all have distinct roles, including correcting. When I asked Stephen Mintz, a historian of families and childhood at the University of Texas at Austin, whether child rearing in the United States specifically had ever involved a more collective approach, he seemed almost tickled. Did it ever, he wrote. Back, he recalled that during his own childhood in the 1950s, he was constantly corrected by people other than his parents for his poor posture, hygiene, grooming, and language. Child rearing into the first half of the 20th century was, he noted, far more of a communal and public endeavor, an approach that entailed a fair amount of what would, by contemporary standards, probably be considered intrusion. Neighbors, teachers, shopkeepers, and even strangers on the street, Mintz wrote, felt empowered and often morally obligated to correct a child's misbehavior, scold a lack of manners, break up a fight, or escort a wandering child back home. Exactly, like we used to be, but this is when there was more of a homogeneous culture. Now that we have much more of what's called a heterogeneous culture, like there's so many pockets of culture, there's not one American kind of thing, even though we say like America, like that's not everybody in the United States. And so there's not one way to parent. So we've lost that ability, which I think is also adding to parental burnout because we feel like we have to do it all by ourselves. And here's the thing, we don't. We can be with friends and we can reprimand our kids and those kind of things. Even me, like when I have friends come over and their kids are acting a fool, I will be standoff because I don't want them to be like, oh, the child psychologist is like reprimanding my kids and they're judging me. I don't do it, even though I could like de-escalate the situation and like stop the bad behavior in less than 5 minutes. I still don't do it because I don't want to step on anyone's toes. And this is me. I just don't want to step on anyone's toes. So I'm guessing that's what everyone else is feeling. Let me know what you all think. Today, this sort of village-style oversight remains a norm in some pockets of the United States. Michelle Peters, a project manager in El Paso, Texas, whose family has roots in Mexico, told me that she has seen communities in both the U.S. and Mexico take a more collective approach to child rearing. It is more common and more acceptable for adults to correct children who are not their own, she said, and people feel a greater sense of social intimacy and immediacy, which extends to caregiving in public settings. Yet in much of the United States, Mintz told me, the collective has given way to a privatized and protected model of parenting. I'm Mexican American. Our family, everyone is correcting everyone's kids. Like there is no like, oh, that's my kid, don't correct them. There's none of that. As in other aspects of parenthood, that closed off approach gives parents more control, but also puts them under more pressure. What did I just say a few minutes ago? If you're the sole arbiter of your child's public behavior, you have to keep a pretty close eye on your kid at all times. That sense of responsibility can also produce anxiety. Rather than just parenting as I see fit, I often find myself guessing and second guessing whether my kids are bothering people or violating some unspoken rule. Guilty. Is my daughter standing way too close to that guy? Does that shopkeeper mind that my kid is flipping through their magazines? Amy Banta, a mom of 3 in Salt Lake City, told me that this is one reason she really appreciates it when other people step in to correct her kids. I cannot anticipate your every boundary that my child might possibly cross, she said. You're going to have to help me out. Exactly. And I think there's like an appropriate way to do it. You can say like, "Hey, please don't do that." You're not like yelling at the kid, you're not reprimanding them, you're not criticizing them. You're simply setting a boundary. Boundaries are okay, and you're telling them like, "Hey, this is my property. This is my space. I don't like that. Don't do that." If the goal is to steadily acquaint children with the conventions of polite society, it isn't clear that filtering all guidance through parents is the most effective approach. For one thing, kids are smart. A child who knows that his parent or other caregiver is the only one who will ever correct him might reasonably conclude that he can get up to no good whenever that adult turns away. What's more, I have found that a stranger's gentle intervention, as opposed to my nagging, can be a more effective means of conveying to my kids that the people around them are real people with their own needs, whose space and comfort one ought to respect. Another adult's nudging can function as a kind of social proof, as Banta put it, a reinforcement of the lesson a parent is trying to impart. Yeah, because like when I remember we went to Cedar Point with our kids and it was like, okay, hey, let's pay attention to other people walking and how far away are we and how close are we standing to other people in line. And I would love it if people were like, hey, buddy, like you were standing a little too close. But again, we're not doing that because we're afraid of that escalation. Banta told me about a time when she took her 5-year-old to a community theater performance and he struggled to sit still. I kept telling him that he couldn't wiggle in his seat because he was shaking the whole row. Banta recalled, but he didn't want to listen to me because he was having so much fun bouncing. At intermission, another woman in the row asked Banta's son to stop shaking the seat so much. I looked at my son and said, "See, it's not just me," Banta told me. He was far more mindful of his movements during the second act, periodically checking to see if he was bothering the woman down the row, who gave him a big thumbs up after the show ended. Oh my goodness, the story reminds me of when my husband and I went on a cruise, and we went to see one of the performances, and we were in the second row, and my husband's tall, he's 6'6", and so we went to sit down, and there was a woman, like an elderly woman in front of me who was in a wheelchair, and my husband sat down, and I think he might have like, because he's tall, clipped his knee on the front, and she like immediately turned around and was like, "Will you mind not hitting my seat?" And my husband and I were like, whoa, okay. And then the lady just turned out to be batshit crazy. I could tell you, I could do a whole YouTube video just on how batshit crazy this woman was. But anyways, the collective approach to correcting kids' behavior can have its drawbacks, of course. Plenty of people have truly unreasonable expectations about the way kids should act in public. Miranda Rake, a writer and mother of 2 in Oregon, told me that she thinks tolerance for ordinary kid behavior in much of America is too low, even in Portland, which she considers quite laid back. She gets the stink eye in many places and feels like she's on eggshells in a lot of coffee shops and certainly restaurants, she said. Just isn't a culture of community around kids here. No. Dogs, of course, we can have dogs. Like, we love dogs. Goodness gracious, people, stop with all the dog stuff. Kids are more important than dogs. Come at me if you disagree. There just isn't a culture of community. Okay, in her view, that complicates the question of whether interventions from non-parents would make the environment more or less family friendly. Rake's concern is not entirely unfounded. In the United States, collective supervision of children has typically coincided with community norms that could be rigid or exclusionary, Mintz told me, and the majority of adults could at times be authoritarian or abusive. Meanwhile, in my modern societies outside America, tolerance for childlike unruliness is part and parcel of the more communal approach to raising kids. That was also the norm for most of our evolutionary past, Sarah B. Hardy, an anthropologist who has extensively studied child-rearing dynamics in traditional hunter-gatherer societies, told me. Where instruction does occur in such cultures, it tends to involve subtle, often non-verbal guidance, or the sort I encountered in Prague, rather than scolding or censure. I wonder if we could do that in America, where like you don't actually say anything, you just kind of do that gesture. I wonder, maybe I'll try it out. We'll see. Maybe you should try it out. Let me know. The challenge of balancing tolerance and discipline aside, both Hardy and Mintz observed that in many ways, American society is simply not set up for a thriving culture of a community oversight. That's an understatement. Which such a culture once existed, it was propped by various forms of social infrastructure, the kind that has been steadily hollowed out over the past decades. Mintz told me, American neighborhoods used to be more tightly knit, a lower proportion of of mothers were employed outside the home, which meant that neighborhoods were filled with adults during the day who could keep an eye on others' children. A strongly ingrained cultural respect for adult authority meant that few questioned a neighbor's right to reprimand a child for rudeness or risk-taking behavior, Mint said, and the potential personal risk, legal or otherwise, of disciplining a child not your own were fewer. Adults could discipline, correct, or even physically intervene without fear of being sued, shamed, or filmed. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I already mentioned, like, we're too heterogeneous to kind of have this community tribe vibe. But I think that's the thing. Like, oh, there was something in here. It was just our ability, like, to keep an eye on kids and to know that, like, your neighbor's got your back. In an era when fewer people know or interact with their neighbors and social trust has waned, the thought of reviving collective child-rearing norms may seem a little far-fetched. And yet, the Americans I spoke with seemed, on the whole, largely open to being a bit more direct with other people's kids. If only they could have assurance that such involvement would be welcome. I'll come out and say it. I would certainly welcome it. I think I would too. Like, if someone was just like, hey, and my child was like, again, invading their boundaries and like making them uncomfortable, like invading their personal space, absolutely, like, tap my child, be like, hey, appropriately, those kind of things. But I think that's what I wanted to say. I think right now parents are so like, my child is perfect and they would never do anything wrong. And it's like, oh my God. And it's this whole gentle parenting thing that's just ruining our youth and us as parents, because it's exhausting. Because, like, especially we see this with teachers, like, my kid would never do that. Your child is totally the bully. Watch that video that I did before. All right, so love this article. I am with, I think her name was Sarah. I can't remember. And I threw the paper on the floor. But I'm totally with her. I welcome it. So who else is with us on, like, the gentle kind of nonverbal, like, if a child is invading or acting a fool in your own personal space or in your property, like your store or whatever, there are like, hey, please don't do that. The end. I think this will make parental burnout, much less of a thing than it currently is, because it's a thing. I don't know if you all know. And it's going to be better for the kids because they're going to know that there are certain expectations of them in different people's property. They can act one way in this store, but they can't act this way in this other store. I would welcome it. How about you? Tell me about this. And I think if we start doing this, and we start doing these little things and more of us are welcoming it, we're going to be throat punching this Gen Z mental health crisis. Let's go.